Hello and welcome to episode 9 of The List Makers, a mini podcast from the Doctor Who show, where we take a top 5 topic, each make our lists and discuss them. But there are no hard and fast rules, it's all about the chat. Hello, I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
And in this episode, we're talking top 5 classic Who writers. The format's the same as always, however, we'll give our lists uninterrupted and then we'll compare notes. Now, Rob, recently we had our biggest set of snaps ever.
We did.
I'm quietly predicting this could be a snaptastic episode.
Yeah, okay.
But we may have each gone in some different directions within that. I don't know. I could be completely wrong. Let's dive in. Rob, it's your turn to go first. Would you like to make your list of top 5 classic Who writers?
I would love to, Dave. Coming in at number 5, and I think this is where we'll probably snap the least, I'm going to slip in Ben Aronovich. And this is probably surprising, because in truth, I couldn't have him any higher than 5 in my list, because he only did 2 stories back in the classic era. And one of them, Battlefield, doesn't actually do it for me. I know you quite like it, Dave, but it doesn't do it for me. However, he's here because he single-handedly reignited Doctor Who for me with Remembrance. Now, that might sound weird, so let me say, yes, I was in my mad ferret stage at the time, and in truth, anything on television, Doctor Who-wise, I would have watched it. But at the back of my mind, in this era, I would think, even as an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I would think this show can be pretty bloody awful, can't it? You know, I would have that thought to myself. Then Remembrance came along, and good Lord, it showed what Doctor Who could be, even in the 80s, even on those dodgy budgets. The story still holds up today, so he makes the list just for doing that.
Nice.
In at number 4, Malcolm Hulke. When it comes to Doctor Who being political, Mac Hulke is the granddaddy of them all. He's certainly not the only Who writer to do politics, but I think the writer who most consistently wheedled politics into everything he did. And, you know, despite being of the left, I think the way he did his politics wasn't the, shall we say, subtle as a sledgehammer style that modern writers seem to do, where they'll do something ridiculously heavy-handed and then have one of the characters virtually turn to camera and remind you that, yes, I just did something political there in case you missed it. You know, yeah. Hulk's writing was much smarter than that. I mean, think of, there's the Faceless Ones. I mean, he did that with David Ellis. War Games, he did with Terrence Dicks. Silurians, Sea Devils, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. There's more. You know, he is just a great classic era writer, so he makes the list. In at number 3, I've put Terrence Dicks. Now, while Terrence was a script editor on Doctor Who and as such didn't write a lot of TV stories, the ones he did write, like the War Games with Malcolm Hulke, who we just mentioned, or Robot, Horror Fang Rock, State of Decay, 5 Doctors, are all pretty major damn stories. And I left Brain of Morbius off that list as it was extensively rewritten, you know, but that's a whole nother story. But it's an example of something he was involved with. But, you know, as well as his script editing and the actual stories he wrote that I've just mentioned, I think we can't talk about classic era writers without Terrence getting a shout out for his work on the Target novels, you know, and I can just go on autopilot here, you know, he taught so many of us to read, he made simple rewrites of scripts extremely engaging, you know, and the bloke was just so lovely, you know, etc, etc. So Terrence Dicks in at number 3. In at number 2, I've put Douglas Adams.
Ooh.
How can we have a man like Douglas Adams write for the series and not have him on this list? I mean, granted, his stories and his era as a script editor can be very Marmite for people, even something that can change for people over time. As a more serious fan, when I was young, I was mostly aghast at the Adams era. It was, you know, silly, and Doctor Who couldn't be silly. I was so determined on this idea that I could actually read Hitchhiker's Guide or watch the Hitchhiker's Guide TV series and think that was absolutely hilarious. So it wasn't a beef with his style. I actually liked his style. I got it. It made me laugh. But in terms of Doctor Who, no way you couldn't do that. But once I'd grown up and parts of me had mellowed, I can now watch his era on the show and just luxuriate in it. You know, it's pretty weird, hey? Yes. And in at number 1, this is going to be no surprise to anybody, I've put Bob Holmes. I know there's probably some contrarian out there living on Mars who would say, no way is Bob Holmes the best classic writer, and indeed, you know, how does he even make your top 5? I understand such people might exist. But I think for most people, and certainly for me, the stories Holmes wrote and the ones he script edited are among the best of the classic era. You know, you can't watch slabs of Classic Who and not be watching something he's been involved with, especially during Tom's era. He's there for the big stuff. I can read off names like Spearhead from Space, Terror of the Ordons, Carnival of Monsters, Ark in Space, Pyramids of Mars, Deadly Assassin, Towns of Weng Chiang, Caves of Androzani. Bob is great. Full stop.
That's a pretty strong list there, Rob.
Thank you very much.
It is snappy, but I wouldn't say quite snaptastic.
That's excellent.
That is. We'll see how many snaps we have, but there are snaps, but as I say, we'll see how many there are. I will launch into making my list and then we'll do our discussion, as always. Now, I am invoking the no hard and fast rules and going for a top 6 on this occasion.
Okay.
As I occasionally do, and I really had to on this one. I'll start off with number 6, the person who I just couldn't in all conscience leave off the list, and that's John Lucarotti.
Ah, yes.
Look, I know that he's probably not on everybody's top 5 list, probably not on a lot of fans' top 5 lists in many ways, but the stories that he wrote are favourites of mine. The Aztecs, the Massacre, and particularly Marco Polo. I just think they are some of the best scripted Doctor Who of all time. They are wonderful, poetic, balletic, character-driven. In the case of Marco Polo, particularly geographically epic. They are just wonderful evocations of historical events, and so I had to have him down there for his 3 stories. Number 5, this will come as no surprise, I think, to people who are long-time listeners of the podcast. I have put in here Terry Nation.
Fair, very fair.
I am, as I think you know, Rob, and I think many of our listeners know, a real fan of Terry Nation's style of writing. It's a fan love of his that extends to a lot of his other work, particularly, obviously, Black 7, which I'm a huge fan of. But every one of Terry Nation's adventures is at least that. It is a really good, fun adventure. You can't ignore the fact that he created the Daleks either. That is a big, big thing. And it came out of his philosophy as a writer that anything can happen in the worlds I create and should happen. And that inventiveness coupled with a real spirit of adventure is really good. And look, he did write what is often praised by fans as being a potentially top number 1 story, Genesis of the Daleks. So I think for that alone, he deserves to be up there. Continuing on with a Dalek theme, at number 4, I have David Whittaker. Again, reflecting probably my love of the 60s era of classic Doctor Who. Whittaker wrote Power of the Daleks, he wrote Evil of the Daleks, he wrote The Crusade. And just like you said with Robert Holmes and Terence Dix, when you look at their script editing work as well, when you look at the role that David Whittaker played in the writing of so many of those early seasons of Doctor Who, that I think also has to count in there. So great stories that he's written himself, a great script editor, great writer, David Whittaker. Number 3 is another personal pick that will be on some people's lists, but perhaps not widely on a number of lists, and that is Chris Boucher. Now, again, I'm a fan of Chris Boucher because of his script editor work on Blake 7, that's obvious, but Chris Boucher has not quite unique, but getting up there unique contribution in that, in my view, his 3 stories are 3 for 3 in terms of absolute classics, particularly The Robots of Death. This is a story that is regularly in fans' top 5, if not top 10. Image of the Fendal, I think, is a really good, spooky story, and The Face of Evil, or I like to use the working title, The Day That God Went Mad, I just think, again, is a really clever script, and all of his scripts are clever. They are witty in the days before Moffat and before RTD. The dialogue is again written in this really clever, natural but funny way. The scenarios that he creates are good. The world building that Boucher creates is second almost to none. You look at how he creates the world in The Robots of Death, and we know what this planet is. We know that there are cities. We know there are founding families and how the social dynamics work and all of that. He does it without ever doing exposition dumps. So Chris Boucher at number 3. Look, we've had no snaps yet, so it's obvious that I think the snaps are coming.
Okay.
I have got at number 2 Robert Holmes.
Okay.
And look, everything that you said, Rob, I concur with. We can't create these lists and not have Robert Holmes on them. Had we not snapped on Robert Holmes, I would have been utterly shocked.
The show would have been over.
Yeah, I think we would have had to cancel each other. Yeah, Robert Holmes, look, everybody listening, I'm sure, knows how good he is and how many classics he wrote and how many classics he edited, what a brilliant writer he was, how inventive he was, how his very dark and adult sense of humour occasionally crept in, things that you don't notice when you're a kid, and then suddenly go, did he just make a reference? Did he just say what I thought he... Wow. There's a lot to his writing. So he is number 2 on my list. And look, it was very tight, but in the end, I did put Malcolm Hulke at number 1.
Right, yeah.
Robert Holmes is equally worthy of the number 1. I'm glad you had him at number 1 so they can each share those honours. The reason I went with Hulke is because... And maybe Hulke is slightly unfairly advantaged in that he has a smaller body of work, so it's easier to maintain a standard. But I do think Hulke maintained a standard over all of his work. I can't think of a weak Malcolm Hulke story. I can think of weak Robert Holmes stories, particularly at the start and the end of his run. So I put Hulke above him for that. And again, as you said with Malcolm Hulke, the characters, the ideas... You think of something like the Silurians, and you have those different types of Silurians, all with different personalities. Something like Colony in Space, which some people might say is one of his weaker stories, I think is extraordinarily good. And in that, you have all these different shades of baddie. Caldwell is a different type of baddie to Dent, who's a different type of baddie to the others, and the goodies are different shades. There's the nice, lovable Robert Ashe, and then there's the slightly harder edged and a bit more violent Winton. It's all different shades, and again, you're right with his politics. We have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Invasion of the Dinosaurs, a favourite story of mine. Yes, that is political. As a 6-year-old, I didn't really notice. I kind of got a broad conservation message, which is good. And as an adult, you appreciate that the message in there is extremism is dangerous. He's not saying left-wing extremism is dangerous, right-wing extremism is dangerous. He's not saying the solution to conservation is we need to have a carbon tax, we need to have more technology, or we need to No, it's just very broad feelings of extremism is bad, conservation's good, and here are some cool dinosaurs and some great villains. And that's the wonder of Malcolm Hulke. So, Rob, 2 snaps, probably the obvious snaps, I think.
I think so. I thought we might have had more, though. Yeah.
Look, we could very easily have had more. Everyone on your list was on my list of possibles. Names that we haven't mentioned as well that are on my list. Ian Briggs, who wrote 2 good stories, and I think one really classic story in The Curse of Fenric. Rona Munro, 1 story, but it's really good. Robert Banks Stewart, I felt really bad I couldn't get in there because he wrote like an absolute classic in Seeds of Doom, and pretty good, if not another classic in Terror of the Zygons. There were a lot to choose from. Any that you feel bad about leaving out, Rob?
No, I felt pretty comfortable. I mean, Boucher was floating around, and I thought, well, he only did a few stories, and I thought, well, hang on, I put Aronovich in here, and he only did 2, so, maybe. But no, I'm pretty happy. I mean, some of those early 60s writers, too, like Luca Roddy, who I sort of came to through Target novels, like, Luca Roddy novelised the Massacre, didn't he? I think.
Yes, he did, yes.
Yeah. And, so I would see John Luca Roddy's name on Target novels originally, which is how I sort of came to know him first. And so I'd say, yeah, there are some interesting dudes floating around. Whitaker, of course, they've all done important stuff.
And what I think is really interesting when you look across this list of, 9 nominations that we've made, it's a lot of character-written stuff and also a lot of good adventure. And when you say Aronovich, and again, I thought about Aronovich, I actually do think he is very spiritually in the same vein as Terry Nation, in that he's writing really good adventures. I think both Battlefield and particularly Remembrance are really good adventures, but he's also got, again, those character moments. Mike Smith is a really interesting and real character. Ratcliffe is a really interesting, horrific, but very scarily real character.
Oh, absolutely. And look, what really won it for me, as I said, is just where that fell in Doctor Who history. The Colin thing happened. Sylvester's first series wasn't so great. But then, bugger me, bang, the first story of the next series, it's Remembrance of the Daleks, it's amazing. and he just lifted me, and I think a lot of the viewing audience, up out of their stupor. And it was like, Doctor Who can be great. Here it is. Here's the proof.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Douglas Adams, he made number 2 on your list. He didn't make mine, but he was in my list of considerations. I want to tease out a bit. How much is that because it's Douglas Adams? How much is it because you love his scripts? And how much is it because he just script edited a really fun era of the show? Or is it all of that?
Well, it is all of that. I mean, I began my spiel by saying, how can we have a man like Douglas Adams involved with Doctor Who and not mention him?
Yeah.
Particularly if there's any listeners out there who don't realise that Douglas Adams wrote and script edited for Doctor Who. Yeah, he really did, guys. He's one of us. And that should just be celebrated forevermore, because Douglas Adams is fantastic. But yeah, like I say, when I was a kid, his stories, which I would find quite silly, I wasn't as into as I am now. Maybe I just get them more, maybe I've mellowed. I don't know what it is, but I quite enjoy the contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of something like The Pirate Planet.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it as a kid, but I didn't really get it as a kid. And then you watch it as an adult, and some of those jokes are... I mean, they are absolutely Imperial phase Douglas Adams stuff. All that stuff with the induction corridor and everything. It's just... Even when you've seen it a dozen times, it's still laugh-out-loud hilarious.
Oh, yeah, this is still Douglas Adams as an up-and-comer, a young thrusting... Is that the expression? It sounds quite rude. You know what I mean? A young thrusting guy, really working hard and not sort of, resting back on his laurels like he might have done more into the mid-'80s, late 80s, that sort of thing. Like, I'm Douglas Adams, I can take, however long I want to write this book or whatever. This is still Douglas Adams working hard at his craft, in a position where Doctor Who, which wouldn't have had the biggest of budgets, could grab him as a script editor, and he was willing to do it. That wouldn't have happened a decade later in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting as I look across both our lists. It is weighted very heavily towards the 70s. Picks like Hulk, Holmes, Boucher, Adams, and the like. A lot of our big picks, Dicks, are very much from the 70s, which perhaps does reflect that sort of, in inverted commas, golden era of Who. I've got a couple there from the 60s, Luke Roddy, Whittaker particularly. The 80s, not so much represented.
No, outside of Aronovich, but I think you're right, because it is the golden age of Doctor Who. You can find great stuff in the 60s, you can find great stuff in the 80s, but for that consistent decade, it's the 70s. That's where the good stuff happened. It's a fact.
And I do wonder if you took scripts by Ian Briggs and Ben Aronovich and Rona Munro, those later era McCoy scripts, and had them produced by Philip Hinchcliffe on the budget that Hinchcliffe had, like the comparable budget that he had, which was considerably more than they were dealing with in the 80s. Would that have elevated a lot of their work to the point that they would be considered a lot more? Like I guess what I'm saying is, does production affect how we judge the script and the writers?
Oh, I think so. Production, which I include direction in that as well.
Yeah.
Casting. Because I was recently watching a story. I won't say from what era it was, but it's for something we're doing on the other show. And I looked at the direction and I thought, this is directed like a stage play. This is just bizarre. Mm-hmm. And the stories either side of it in the same season, I thought, these don't feel like stage plays at all. Yet they're both in studios. What's the difference? It is the direction. Some of them are directed very dynamically. Others are directed like it's a year 12 stage play for the parents. It's a huge thing. Yes. Yeah.
Like for example, you look at Boucher's 3 stories. They are all superbly cast and directed, and I think that does help to elevate dialogue in the way that some other stories aren't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Rob, we are well and truly running up to our 20-minute time limit on this one, so it is now time to pull another topic from Turlough's Hat of Rassilon.
Here we go.
Reminder to our listeners, please do submit ideas to us via email or Facebook or Twitter or however you want. And the topic for next month, Rob, is top 5. This is a complicated one.
Okay.
Top 5 stories not a standard TV story.
Okay, I'm turning that around in my head. Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
So,
sure.
There's a lot of options out there, actually. Top
okay,
5
that's gonna be
stories
fun.
that are not a TV story. Fantastic. Right. Well, we're out of time, but there are lists. I've been Dave.
And I've been Rob.
And we'll make some more lists soon.
Bye now.
Goodbye.